Up until now, we've been writing code that's designed to be executed line by line, one piece after the other. All of our scripts, we write line after line after line, and MATLAB goes through it. Even the subfunctions that we use, it still goes through every line of the subfunction before returning to where it left off. That's what we call a sequence structure. But there are other types of structures, such as selection. That's what we're going to be working with today. In this type of structure, the code can branch depending on the value of certain variables or whatever you want, and go into one or more different branches. The other type that we'll look at later is called a repetition structure or a loop, but we'll get into those in another video. So let's get over to MATLAB. And what I have here is a brand new file that I'm going to call branches, and I'll say this is selection structures or branches, because the code branches and goes off in different directions depending on what you want. So the first way we can do this is your basic if. So the structure of an if looks like this. First you have the word if, and then you have some sort of comparison, like if x is less than 12. Then you have some statements, and we will indent those statements. Statements that are done if comparison is true. Then you have the word end to show we've reached the end of all the statements that only get run when the comparison is true. And I will add this in MATLAB. A lot of times, try to use find instead, if you can. If it's possible to use find instead, the find command, then that will usually be better. We definitely don't want to go through all of the values in a matrix using the if statement just to find values that are bigger than something or less than something. That's exactly what find is for, and it's much more efficient. So try to use find if you can. But let's see an example using if. Let's get some values from the user. So let's say entry, and then we'll say input, enter a positive number. We'll leave a space, we'll close the quote, and we're not expecting a string, so we won't put the S there. And then I'll say if the entry is greater than 0, oops, 0. So here's my comparison. Notice there's no brackets or anything like that. We don't need parentheses. You can use parentheses to set this apart. But it's optional. Parentheses are optional. And then we'll notice when I hit enter, MATLAB automatically indents for me. It sees the if, it put it in blue because it's special, and it said, all right, what are you going to do with this? And that's also giving me, by the way, an error message. When you mouse over that little red squiggle, it says an end might be missing. Yep, you're exactly right, MATLAB. Give me a sec. So what do we want to do? If the entry is greater than 0, display, I don't know. I'll tell you what, let's make it negative, and then we can display that is a negative number. And then say, then boo, right? So then we just need the end statement at the end to say we are done with that. So you might use this if you're got a program that requires a user input and you're going to do something with it. You might want to check first if it's not an allowable number, like they gave me a negative when I asked for a positive, then I might need to end the program or do something else or get a new number instead. Let's run this section and see how it works. So enter positive number. If I enter -5, I get this response that is a negative number. And you could say boo or whatever you want. But let's see what happens when I get when I put in a positive number. Run section, enter positive number. Nothing happens. There is nothing here that's going to execute when the number was positive. So we would need to write more code in order to do that. Let's do that actually. Let's add the next step beyond a basic if, which is an if with an else. This gives me two different options. This is that branch where we say, okay, we're coming down, and then if it's true, we go here, else, which is otherwise, we go over there. So let's do this. An else is something we put with the if statement. So an else can be added to an if statement to allow something else to happen when the comparison is false. So let's see. Let's copy and paste from above. I want this same code here. We've got enter a, let's make this a little bigger and read it. Input, enter a positive number. If the entry is negative, we'll say that is a negative number. Sorry. And then else, so I'm going to make room before I get to the end. This is where I put the else. And again, we're going to indent the statements to run when the else is true. So in this case, here, entry is not less than 0. It could be 0, but let's just ignore that for a moment and say else display you did it. I know we haven't dealt with the 0 case yet, but let's run this section and say enter positive number. If I put a -1, sorry, but if I let's run it again, and if I put in a negative, let's put in a positive this time, like 100.1, I get you did it, which is this statement. So we're getting one or the other. That's the key here. We're getting one or the other. Now, what if it's a 0? There's a better thing to use besides if we're worried about 0. We'll get to that later. So actually, we can do it this way. There's a better way to do it, but we can kind of make it work here with what's called an else if. So let's do that real quick. Else if. So I'm going to copy this again, including the entry, and do it slightly differently. Right in here, after these statements are evaluated, I'm going to squeeze in an else if. It's like an else and another if all in one. If the entry is equal to 0, and remember for a logical operator, we need to, a relational operator, we need to have that double equal sign. So if it's exactly equal to 0, say neither positive nor negative. And just leave it at that. Oops, I had an extra mark in there. Else, here the entry is actually greater than 0. So now we know we've made it. Let's run this a few times to test it. Let's clear in CLC, and run this section, enter a positive number. If I enter -7, I get the statement that says it's negative. Run it again. If I enter 0, I get this statement, neither positive nor negative. And then if I run it again and enter positive, I get you did it. So we can combine ifs with else, and then there's this extra thing called else if that allows us to have another if statement right after the first one. And by the time you get more than one else if, you really should be using a different structure. It's not very readable to have a bunch of else ifs. So we'll look at other ways to do similar things in another video.